If you travel back more than 3,000 years into the heart of ancient Italy, you would not find a unified nation, and you would not find Rome ruling an empire stretching across continents. You would find a landscape of hills, forests, rivers, volcanic slopes, and scattered communities struggling to survive in a world where power was local, identity was tribal, and the future was impossible to imagine. Long before Roman legions marched across Europe, before emperors ruled from marble palaces, and before the Latin language became one of the most influential languages in human history, there were the Latins. Their story begins in central Italy. It begins in a region known to ancient people as Latium. This was not a vast kingdom. It was not a mighty empire. It was a relatively small territory stretching along the western coast of Italy, bounded by rivers, mountains, forests, and fertile plains. Yet from this modest homeland would emerge one of the most consequential peoples in world history. The land itself played a crucial role in shaping their destiny. Much of Latium was formed by ancient volcanic activity. Massive eruptions in prehistoric ages had created rich soils filled with minerals and nutrients. The extinct volcanic complex known today as the Alban Hills dominated the landscape. Its slopes overlooked valleys, lakes, and fertile agricultural land. For the people who settled there, the environment offered both opportunities and challenges. The soil was exceptionally productive. The hills provided natural defenses. The forests supplied timber. The rivers offered transportation routes and fresh water. But survival still demanded constant labor, constant vigilance, and constant adaptation. Around the beginning of the first millennium BC, communities began appearing throughout this region that archaeologists identify as the ancestors of the Latins. They did not arrive as a conquering army. They did not suddenly emerge from nowhere. Rather, they developed gradually from the broader cultural landscape of Iron Age Italy. The process was slow. Generations passed before a distinct Latin identity began to take shape. Archaeological discoveries throughout the Alban Hills reveal evidence of these early communities. At sites near modern Castel Gandolfo, Marino, and other settlements scattered across the volcanic highlands, researchers have uncovered traces of villages dating back to around 1000 BC. The remains are modest by later standards. Simple houses, storage pits, burial grounds, fragments of pottery, tools, weapons. Yet these remains tell an extraordinary story. They reveal the emergence of a people who were beginning to distinguish themselves from their neighbors. One of the clearest signs comes from the way they treated their dead. Burial customs often preserve cultural identity more clearly than almost any other archaeological evidence. Among the early Latins, cremation became a defining practice. The deceased were burned. Their ashes were carefully collected. The remains were placed inside distinctive urns. These urns were often shaped like two joined cones. Archaeologists call them biconical urns. The urns were then buried within circular pits. To modern eyes, the difference may seem small. To ancient communities, it mattered enormously. Nearby peoples followed different traditions. Some buried their dead intact. Others combined multiple methods. The Latins consistently favored cremation. In doing so, they signaled a cultural identity that was becoming increasingly distinct. Inside many of these urns, archaeologists have discovered objects that once belonged to the deceased. Bronze brooches, weapons, jewelry, tools, personal ornaments. These items offer a glimpse into everyday life. They reveal a society where status existed, but extreme inequality had not yet emerged. Some graves contain more valuable goods than others. Some individuals clearly possessed greater wealth and prestige. Yet the differences remain relatively modest. This was not yet the world of vast aristocratic fortunes. It was a society still rooted in kinship, agriculture, and local community. The pottery found in these settlements tells another part of the story. The vessels were usually made from coarse clay. Many featured geometric decorations, patterns of lines, triangles, simple artistic motifs. At first glance, they appear ordinary. But when compared with pottery from neighboring regions, subtle differences become visible. These differences reflect local traditions, local preferences, local identities. Every bowl, storage jar, and cooking vessel became part of a cultural language through which communities expressed who they were. The arrival of iron transformed this world. For centuries, bronze had dominated tool and weapon production. Bronze remained important, but iron gradually became more common. Iron spearheads appear in archaeological deposits. Iron knives, iron agricultural implements. The metal was harder to produce, more difficult to work, yet it offered significant advantages. A community possessing reliable access to iron tools could clear forests more efficiently, cultivate larger fields, construct stronger defenses, and defend itself more effectively against rivals. This transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age was not simply a technological change. It altered social organization, economic production, military capabilities, and ultimately political development. The settlements themselves reveal how early Latin communities adapted to their environment. Most villages occupied elevated positions. Hilltops became preferred locations. From these heights, inhabitants could monitor surrounding territory. Potential threats could be seen from a distance. Defensive advantages were obvious. At the same time, nearby valleys provided access to fertile agricultural land. The pattern appears again and again across Latium. Communities balanced security with economic necessity. They needed protection. They also needed productive farmland. The future site of Rome followed exactly this pattern. Long before Rome existed as a city, small settlements occupied the hills overlooking the Tiber River. The location offered advantages that would later become obvious to generations of Roman leaders. But at this early stage, nobody could have imagined what would eventually emerge there. Language formed another crucial element of Latin identity. The people inhabiting Latium spoke an early form of the language we now call Latin. This language belonged to the larger Indo-European family. Its distant relatives stretched across much of Europe and parts of Asia. Other Italic peoples spoke related languages. The Oscans, the Umbrians, various smaller groups, all shared common linguistic ancestry. Yet over time, each language evolved along its own path. By the time written evidence begins appearing, Latin had already become distinct. Certain sounds changed differently. Certain grammatical forms evolved in unique ways. Vocabulary developed along local lines. These differences may seem technical, but language shapes identity. Every conversation reinforced the boundaries separating communities. Every generation inherited a linguistic tradition connecting them to their ancestors. The earliest surviving Latin inscriptions are rare. Most appear centuries after the first Latin settlements emerged. Yet even these limited examples reveal a language that was already separate from its neighbors. The process had taken hundreds of years. Languages rarely transform overnight. They evolve gradually. Small changes accumulate. Over generations, mutual intelligibility declines. Eventually, distinct linguistic identities emerge. This was precisely what happened among the Italic peoples. While archaeology provides physical evidence, ancient legends offer a different perspective. They do not provide reliable history in the modern sense, yet they reveal how later generations understood their origins. No legend became more important than the story of Aeneas. According to ancient tradition, Aeneas escaped the destruction of Troy. After a long journey across the Mediterranean, he arrived in Italy. There he married Lavinia, daughter of King Latinus. Together, they became ancestors of the Latin people. The story would later be immortalized by Virgil in the Aeneid. For Romans, the tale carried immense significance. It connected their origins to the heroic age celebrated in Greek epic poetry. It provided noble ancestry. It linked Italy to the wider Mediterranean world. Modern archaeology cannot confirm the story. No evidence proves that Trojan refugees founded Latin civilization. Yet the legend remains important, not because it is literally true, but because it reflects ancient efforts to explain cultural origins. Interestingly, archaeological evidence does show signs of contact between Italy and the Eastern Mediterranean. Trade networks existed, ideas traveled, objects moved across great distances. Cultural influences spread through commerce and migration. The reality was likely far more complex than any single foundation myth. The site traditionally identified with ancient Lavinium offers a fascinating example. Excavations reveal continuous occupation dating back to the early Iron Age. Sanctuaries emerged there. Religious traditions flourished. Generations of worshippers visited sacred sites connected with ancestral memory. Whether or not Aeneas ever existed, Lavinium became one of the most important spiritual centers in Latin culture. People believed it mattered, and belief itself shaped history. The social structure of these early communities revolved around family. Extended kin groups formed the foundation of society. Households were not isolated nuclear families. They often included multiple generations living together. Grandparents, parents, children, relatives, dependents. Everyone contributed to the survival of the group. Archaeological evidence from domestic structures supports this interpretation. Houses often contained multiple rooms organized around shared activities. Storage areas preserved food supplies. Workspaces allowed craft production. Living areas accommodated large family units. The household functioned as both economic enterprise and social institution. Status differences gradually emerged. Some families accumulated more livestock, more land, more influence. Burial evidence demonstrates growing inequality. Certain graves contain imported goods. Others include elaborate ornaments. Still, the society remained relatively fluid compared with later aristocratic systems. Prestige depended heavily upon leadership, reputation, and control of resources. The concentration of wealth was increasing, but it had not yet reached the levels visible in later centuries. The economy rested on two foundations: pastoralism and agriculture. Animals played a central role in daily life. Sheep, goats, cattle. These herds provided meat, milk, wool, leather, bone. They represented mobile wealth. A family with healthy livestock possessed security. A family without animals faced vulnerability. Archaeological remains consistently reveal the importance of herding. Animal bones appear in large quantities throughout Latin settlements. Pastoral life shaped social values, seasonal movement patterns, economic relationships, and even religious beliefs. At the same time, farming expanded steadily. The volcanic soils of Latium were exceptionally fertile. Farmers cultivated wheat, barley, legumes, and other crops. Simple plows scratched through nutrient-rich earth. Harvests supported growing populations. Agriculture encourage de permanent settlement. It tied communities to specific territories. Land became increasingly valuable. Control over productive fields translated into wealth and influence. The integration of farming and herding created a balanced economic system. Families often maintained both crops and livestock. Pastures occupied upland areas. Fields spread across lower plains. Seasonal rhythms governed daily life. Planting, harvesting, breeding, migration. Everything followed patterns shaped by nature. Religious beliefs emerged directly from this environment. The forces governing weather, fertility, and agricultural success appeared powerful and unpredictable. Ancient people sought explanations. They sought protection. They sought favor from supernatural beings believed to influence the world around them. Sacred groves, hilltops, springs, lakes. Certain locations acquired religious significance. Offerings were left at sanctuaries. Animals were sacrificed. Ceramic vessels were dedicated to divine powers. Many deities were associated with fertility, Zen, livestock, agricultural abundance. The survival of the community depended upon these forces. Religious rituals provided a way to negotiate with them. Shared religious practices helped unite scattered settlements. Communities that might otherwise remain isolated gathered for festivals. Pilgrimages connected distant villages. Common rituals reinforced common identity. Gradually, a broader sense of Latin culture began to emerge. People still identified primarily with their local communities, but they increasingly recognized cultural ties extending beyond individual settlements. These connections would become critically important in the centuries ahead, because the world around the Latins was changing. Powerful neighbors surrounded them. To the north, the Etruscans were developing advanced urban societies. To the east and south, other Italic peoples competed for territory and resources. Across the sea, Greek colonies were expanding throughout southern Italy. Trade networks grew. Conflicts intensified. Technologies spread. Ideas moved between cultures. The Latins could not remain isolated. Their future would be shaped not only by their own traditions, but by their interactions with every neighboring people they encountered. And as the centuries passed, the need for cooperation among Latin communities would become impossible to ignore. The scattered villages of Latium were about to enter a new stage of their history, a stage that would transform local identities into something larger, a stage that would eventually give birth to alliances, confederations, rivalries, and ambitions powerful enough to reshape all of Italy. And at the center of that transformation stood the sacred heights of the Alban Hills, where religion, politics, and survival would begin drawing the Latin peoples together into a common destiny. For generations, the communities scattered across Latium had lived as neighbors. They traded with one another. They intermarried. They shared similar languages, customs, and religious traditions. Yet each settlement remained independent. Each community protected its own interests. Each village, town, and hilltop stronghold answered primarily to its own leaders. That arrangement worked well enough when populations were small and threats remained limited. But as the centuries passed, the political landscape of central Italy became increasingly dangerous. The Latins found themselves surrounded by rivals. Powerful Etruscan cities expanded southward. Mountain tribes pressed against their borders. Competition for land intensified. Trade routes became more valuable. Military conflicts became more frequent. The old system of loose cultural connections was no longer sufficient. If the Latin communities wished to preserve their independence, they would need something stronger. Out of this growing necessity emerged one of the most important institutions in early Italian history, the Latin League. Its origins remain partly hidden in the shadows of antiquity. Ancient writers preserve traditions. Archaeology provides fragments of evidence. Neither source tells the entire story. Yet together they reveal the gradual formation of a confederation that united dozens of Latin communities under a shared religious and political framework. The League was not an empire. It was not a centralized state. No single city ruled the others. Instead, it functioned as an alliance, a system through which independent communities cooperated while maintaining their autonomy. The foundation of that cooperation was religion. High above the plains of Latium rose the Alban Hills. The volcanic peaks dominated the surrounding landscape. From their summits, one could see vast stretches of territory. The mountains were visible from distant settlements scattered across the region. For the Latins, these heights possessed deep spiritual significance. At the highest point stood one of the most sacred places in their world, the sanctuary of Jupiter Latiaris. Modern archaeology has revealed traces of this ancient religious center. Although time has erased much of the original structure, excavations have uncovered evidence of temples, ritual spaces, offerings, and centuries of continuous worship. This was not merely a local shrine. It was a gathering place for an entire people. Every year, representatives from Latin communities traveled to the mountain. They came from coastal settlements, from inland towns, from agricultural villages, from fortified hilltop strongholds. They assembled beneath the gaze of Jupiter, the supreme deity of the Latin world. The annual gathering became known as the Ferii Latini, the Latin festival. It was far more than a religious celebration. It was the ceremony through which Latin unity was expressed and renewed. The journey itself carried symbolic importance. Delegations traveled from every member community. Sacred processions climbed the slopes. Animals intended for sacrifice accompanied worshippers. Priests prepared ritual spaces. Leaders discussed matters affecting the Confederation. Families gathered. Merchants traded goods. Young warriors measured themselves against rivals from neighboring towns. The entire event reinforced the idea that despite their political independence, the Latins belonged to a larger cultural community. At the center of the festival stood a sacred sacrifice. Ancient sources describe the offering of a white bull to Jupiter Latiaris. The ritual followed strict procedures. Every action possessed symbolic meaning. Priests recited traditional formulas. Offerings were presented. Prayers were spoken. The sacrifice linked the participating communities to one another and to the divine order they believed governed the world. Afterward came one of the most important aspects of the ceremony, the distribution of the sacrificial meat. This was not a simple meal. The allocation reflected the structure of the league itself. Each community received its designated share. The act symbolized participation in a common identity. Everyone present became part of the same sacred covenant. In a world where alliances could be fragile and political trust difficult to maintain, such rituals possessed immense practical value. They transformed abstract concepts into lived experience. The Ferii Latini helped create the emotional foundation upon which political cooperation could rest. Over time, these gatherings became increasingly important. As threats grew, religious unity evolved into political coordination. The Latin League began developing mechanisms for collective action, not through centralized government, not through permanent bureaucracies, but through assemblies, agreements, and shared obligations. The League likely included around 30 communities, though the exact number varied over time. Some cities held greater influence than others. Certain settlements possessed larger populations. Some controlled strategic locations. Others enjoyed religious prestige. Yet all participated in the broader confederation. Among the most prominent members stood Alba Longa. According to tradition, Alba Longa was the ancient mother city of the Latins. Whether that claim reflected historical reality remains uncertain, but there is little doubt that the city enjoyed immense prestige. Its position in Latin mythology gave it special status. Generations regarded it as a symbol of ancestral continuity. Archaeological evidence indicates that the settlement occupied a favorable position on the slopes of the Alban Hills. Its inhabitants controlled agricultural resources, trade routes, and defensive terrain. For centuries, Alba Longa stood among the leading communities of Latium. Another influential center was Lavinium. Unlike Alba Longa, whose prestige rested largely on tradition, Lavinium possessed powerful religious significance. The city maintained sacred associations connected to ancestral cults and foundation legends. Pilgrims visited its sanctuaries. Political leaders sought legitimacy through participation in its rituals. Lavinium acted as a spiritual anchor for the broader Latin world. Aricia occupied a different role. Located near the famous sanctuary of Diana at Lake Nemi, it controlled important routes through the Alban Hills. The sanctuary itself attracted visitors from far beyond Latium. Its sacred grove became one of the most renowned religious centers in central Italy. As pilgrims arrived from distant regions, Aricia gained influence through its control of this strategic and sacred location. Then there was Tusculum. Perched high above the surrounding countryside, Tusculum commanded key approaches into central Latium. Its position made it militarily valuable. Strong defenses protected the settlement. Its leaders developed extensive relationships throughout the region. Tusculum frequently played important roles in league affairs. Together, these cities and many others formed the backbone of the Confederation. Each brought unique strengths. Each contributed to the League's survival. And survival increasingly became the central concern, because beyond Latium's borders, powerful forces were gathering. To the north rose the Etruscans. The Etruscans represented one of the most advanced civilizations in pre-Roman Italy. Their cities were larger, their craftsmanship more sophisticated, their urban planning more developed, their political institutions more complex. Etruscan settlements such as Veii, Tarquinii, and Caira controlled extensive territories. Their wealth derived from agriculture, trade, and mineral resources. Their artisans produced remarkable works in bronze, pottery, and stone. Their religious systems influenced neighboring cultures across central Italy. For the Latins, the Etruscans were both admired and feared. Cultural exchange flourished. Trade connected the two peoples. Ideas flowed across borders. Yet political competition remained intense. As Etruscan power expanded, Latin communities worried about their independence. No single Latin city possessed the strength to resist major Etruscan pressure alone. Collective defense became essential. Military cooperation therefore emerged as one of the League's most important functions. Ancient warfare differed dramatically from the image many people hold today. Professional, standing armies were rare. Most fighting forces consisted of citizen soldiers, farmers, herders, craftsmen, men who spent much of the year working their land and only occasionally took up arms. When danger threatened, communities mobilized their citizens. The League provided a framework through which these local forces could cooperate. Military obligations likely varied according to population and resources. Larger communities contributed more soldiers. Smaller settlements supplied fewer. Joint operations required coordination. Command arrangements had to be negotiated. Logistics had to be organized. These challenges encouraged increasing political sophistication. Archaeological discoveries reveal growing standardization in weapons and equipment across Latin territory during this period. Spears, shields, helmets, armor components. Many display similarities suggesting shared military practices. This does not necessarily indicate centralized production, but it does suggest extensive communication and cooperation. Latin warriors learned from experience. They adapted foreign innovations. They improved their tactics, and they gradually developed military systems capable of resisting stronger enemies. The natural geography of Latium played a crucial role in defensive planning. The Alban Hills formed a strategic core. River systems provided barriers and communication routes. Fortified settlements occupied key positions. In times of danger, League members could support one another. Enemy armies advancing into Latin territory faced not isolated villages, but interconnected communities capable of collective resistance. This cooperative system proved remarkably effective. Despite pressure from more powerful neighbors, the Latin communities maintained their independence for generations. That success strengthened confidence in the League. It encouraged additional cooperation, and it fostered a growing sense of shared destiny. Yet relations with neighboring peoples were never purely hostile. The same Etruscans who threatened Latin autonomy also influenced Latin culture profoundly. Trade connected communities even during periods of conflict. Merchants crossed political boundaries. Craftsmen exchanged techniques. Religious ideas spread. Technological innovations moved from one society to another. One of the most significant areas of influence involved metallurgy. Etruscan artisans possessed advanced knowledge of bronze casting and ironworking. Latin craftsmen eagerly adopted many of these techniques. Excavations throughout Latium reveal increasing sophistication in metal production. Weapons became more effective. Tools improved. Decorative objects grew more elaborate. This technological exchange strengthened Latin communities economically and militarily. Urban development also reflected Etruscan influence. The Etruscans pioneered sophisticated approaches to city planning. Public spaces became more organized. Infrastructure projects expanded. Drainage systems improved. Fortifications grew stronger. Latin settlements selectively adopted many of these innovations. They borrowed ideas while preserving their own cultural identity. Religion provides another fascinating example. Latin communities incorporated architectural concepts derived from Etruscan temple design. Sacred buildings became larger and more impressive. Decorative elements grew increasingly elaborate. Yet the gods worshipped inside remained distinctly Latin. The process was not one of cultural replacement. It was adaptation, borrowing, selective integration. The Latins demonstrated remarkable flexibility in absorbing useful innovations without surrendering their identity. Their relationships with other Italic peoples followed similar patterns. To the northeast lived the Sabines. Unlike the more urbanized Etruscans, Sabine society remained heavily pastoral. Mountain landscapes shaped their way of life. They shared many cultural features with the Latins while maintaining distinct traditions. Interaction between Latins and Sabines proved extensive. Trade occurred regularly. Families intermarried. Cultural practices crossed ethnic boundaries. Archaeological evidence from frontier regions reveals blended material culture. Pottery styles mix. Burial customs overlap. Artifacts display influences from both traditions. Rather than rigid divisions, these areas formed cultural frontiers where identities interacted continuously. Ancient legends preserve memories of these relationships. Stories such as the famous tale of the Sabine women reflect cultural memories of intermarriage and integration. Although the details belong to mythology rather than history, the broader themes correspond remarkably well with archaeological evidence. The reality was probably less dramatic than the legend suggests. Yet cooperation between Latins and Sabines undoubtedly shaped the development of both peoples. Farther south and east lived the Equi and Volsci. Their relationship with the Latins proved more contentious. Mountain environments encouraged raiding traditions. Competition over territory and resources frequently produced conflict. Archaeological discoveries reveal heavily fortified settlements throughout these regions. Weapons appear in abundance. Defensive architecture dominates many sites. These communities possessed strong warrior traditions. For generations, they challenged Latin expansion and security. Conflicts with the Equi and Volsci forced the League to refine its military organization. Mountain warfare required different tactics than fighting on open plains. Mobility became crucial. Knowledge of terrain mattered enormously. Defensive coordination between league members grew increasingly sophisticated. Every conflict served as a harsh but effective teacher. The Latins learned, adapted, improved, and survived. At the same time, even warfare failed to prevent cultural exchange. Prisoners moved between communities. Trade continued during truces. Ideas crossed frontiers. Technologies spread. Ancient societies rarely fit simple categories of friend and enemy. Relationships were layered, complex, contradictory. The same peoples who fought one another might also trade, intermarry, and share religious practices. Through all these interactions, Latin identity continued evolving. The League strengthened connections among member communities. Religious festivals reinforced common traditions. Military cooperation fostered mutual dependence. Economic exchange linked local markets. Gradually, a broader sense of belonging emerged. Aladdin from one settlement increasingly recognized common ground with Aladdin from another. This transformation did not erase local loyalties. People still identified strongly with their hometowns, their families, their immediate communities. Yet a larger identity now existed alongside those local attachments. And it would soon face its greatest challenge. Because among all the settlements participating in the League, one small community situated beside the Tiber River was beginning to grow in wealth, influence, and ambition. At first, few could have predicted its future. It was merely one Latin settlement among many. Its houses were simple, its population modest, its political importance limited, but its location was exceptional. And as the years passed, that location would allow it to become something no one in Latium had ever seen before. A city capable of transforming itself from a member of the League into the dominant power of central Italy. A city whose rise would forever alter the destiny of every Latin community. A city called Rome. When people think of Rome today, they often imagine a city that seemed destined for greatness from the very beginning. The reality was very different. For much of its early history, Rome was simply one community among many. It was neither the largest city in Latium nor the most prestigious. It possessed no ancient claim to leadership comparable to Alba Longa. It lacked the sacred importance of Lavinium. It did not dominate regional religion the way the sanctuary of Jupiter Latiaris united the Latin peoples. If someone living in central Italy during the early centuries of the first millennium BC had been asked which Latin city would eventually dominate the peninsula, Rome would probably not have been the obvious answer. Yet history often turns on geography, and Rome possessed one of the most advantageous locations in all of Italy. The settlement grew beside the Tiber River. This river served as one of central Italy's most important natural routes. It connected inland territories to the coast. Merchants moved goods along its waters. Travelers crossed through the region. Armies marched beside it. The area where Rome emerged also contained one of the most practical crossing points on the lower Tiber. Whoever controlled that crossing enjoyed access to trade, communication, and movement across a wide region. The advantages did not end there. The settlement occupied a series of hills rising above the surrounding lowlands. These elevations offered natural defensive benefits. Potential attackers could be observed from a distance. The river protected one side. The hills strengthened the others. Nearby plains provided agricultural opportunities. The location combined security with economic potential in a way few other sites could match. Archaeological evidence shows that human communities occupied these hills long before Rome existed as a unified city. Small villages appeared on the Palatine Hill and neighboring elevations. Families lived in simple huts. They farmed nearby land. They tended livestock. They participated in the wider cultural world of Latium. For generations, these settlements remained separate. Each hill supported its own community. Each group maintained its own traditions. Yet over time the boundaries between them began to fade. Population growth encouraged cooperation. Trade created connections. Shared religious practices brought people together. Gradually, the scattered settlements started functioning as parts of a larger whole. Archaeologists have uncovered remains of these early villages. Post holes reveal the locations of huts. Storage pits preserve traces of agricultural activity. Domestic artifacts provide glimpses into everyday life. The structures themselves were modest. Walls consisted of woven branches coated with clay. Roofs were made from thatch. Floors were simple. These were not the buildings of a wealthy city. They belonged to farming communities still deeply connected to the rhythms of the land. Yet beneath this simplicity, significant changes were underway. As the settlements grew closer together, collective projects began appearing. Infrastructure expanded. Public spaces emerged. Social organization became more complex. The communities occupying the hills increasingly acted together rather than separately. One of the most important developments involved the valley between the hills. Originally, this area was marshy and difficult to use. Seasonal flooding created problems. Standing water limited construction. Yet the location held enormous potential. Situated between major settlements, it could become a central gathering place if the environmental challenges could be overcome. At some point during the early development of Rome, ambitious drainage projects transformed the valley. Ancient engineers created channels that redirected water and reduced flooding. The most famous of these projects would later become known as the Cloaca Maxima. Though it underwent numerous modifications over centuries, its origins reflected an extraordinary achievement for the period. The drainage system allowed previously unusable land to become a functional public space. That space evolved into the Roman Forum. The Forum would eventually become one of the most famous locations in world history. In its earliest form, however, it was simply a shared area where communities could meet, trade, conduct ceremonies, and discuss common concerns. The creation of such a space symbolized something larger. It reflected the emergence of a unified political community. The separate hilltop settlements were becoming a city. This process unfolded gradually. There was no single moment when Rome suddenly appeared. Instead, generations contributed to its formation. Families settled new areas. Leaders coordinated projects. Religious institutions expanded. Economic activity increased. Little by little, a new urban center emerged from the landscape of Latium. Religion played a central role in this transformation. Like other Latin communities, Rome organized much of its public life around sacred traditions. Temples appeared. Shrines multiplied. Rituals reinforced social cohesion. Among the most important religious institutions was the cult of Vesta. The sacred fire maintained by her priestesses symbolized the continuity of the community itself. As long as the flame burned, Rome endured. The symbolism was powerful. Fire represented life, protection, continuity. The city and the sacred flame became inseparable in the Roman imagination. Religious institutions also provided stability. Priests preserved traditions. Ceremonies reinforced collective identity. Public rituals created shared experiences that bound diverse groups together. In a world where political structures remained relatively fragile, religion supplied continuity across generations. Ancient traditions later attributed many of Rome's early developments to legendary kings. These figures occupy a complicated position between history and myth. Some may preserve memories of real leaders. Others are likely literary constructions created centuries later. Regardless of their historical accuracy, the traditions themselves reveal how Romans understood their origins. Stories of wise rulers, military victories, religious reforms, and public works reflected values Romans admired. The legends emphasized leadership, discipline, courage, innovation, and above all, the ability to unite diverse peoples into a single community. One recurring theme appears throughout these traditions. Rome was never portrayed as a city built by isolation. Instead, it grew through integration. Different groups joined together. Foreign influences were absorbed. New citizens became part of the community. This narrative reflected an important historical reality. From its earliest stages, Rome existed at the crossroads of multiple cultures. Latin traditions formed its foundation. Sabine influences entered through contact and intermarriage. Etruscan ideas shaped architecture, engineering, and political organization. Greek goods arrived through trade networks. Rather than remaining culturally pure, Rome became remarkably skilled at adaptation. This flexibility would later become one of its greatest strengths. Etruscan influence proved especially significant. By the 6th century BC, Etruscan civilization had reached impressive levels of development. Its cities displayed advanced urban planning. Its artisans produced sophisticated works of art. Its engineers mastered techniques unfamiliar to many neighboring peoples. Rome borrowed extensively from this world. Architectural styles changed. Temple construction became more ambitious. Public works expanded. Political institutions evolved. One of the clearest examples appears in religious architecture. Early Roman temples increasingly reflected Etruscan design principles. Elevated platforms, deep porches, decorative terracotta sculptures. These features transformed the visual landscape of the city. Yet despite adopting foreign techniques, Romans continued worshiping their own gods according to local traditions. Again and again, the pattern repeated itself. Borrow useful ideas, adapt them, make them Roman. The great temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill symbolized this process. Its construction represented a monumental undertaking. The building combined advanced techniques associated with Etruscan craftsmanship and Italic religious traditions. It dominated the skyline. Visitors approaching the city could not miss it. The temple projected power, wealth, confidence, and ambition. At the same time, Rome's growing importance generated tensions within the Latin world. The city remained a member of the Latin League. It participated in shared religious festivals. It contributed troops to collective military efforts. Yet Rome was becoming something more than an equal partner. Its population increased. Its economic influence expanded. Its strategic location generated wealth. Its leaders accumulated experience in diplomacy and warfare. Gradually, Rome's role within the League began changing. Military developments accelerated this process. Ancient warfare rewarded organization. Communities capable of coordinating large numbers of soldiers gained significant advantages. Rome excelled in this area. Its leaders developed systems that enabled broader participation in military service. Citizens were organized according to wealth and capability. Resources could be mobilized more efficiently. Equipment became increasingly standardized. Training improved. The result was a military force that often performed more effectively than those of neighboring communities. This did not happen overnight. It emerged through decades of experimentation and adaptation. Roman soldiers learned from every conflict. They studied their enemies. They borrowed successful tactics. They modified existing methods. Practical results mattered more than tradition. If a new approach worked, Rome adopted it. This pragmatic attitude distinguished the city from many rivals. Conflicts throughout central Italy provided constant opportunities for learning. The Volsci remained active along the southern frontiers. They equally challenged Roman influence in the east. Etruscan cities competed for control of strategic territories. Every campaign exposed Roman commanders to new situations. Every victory and defeat offered lessons. Over time, those lessons accumulated. Military effectiveness increased. Confidence grew. Influence expanded. Diplomacy became equally important. Rome developed a reputation for skillful negotiation. Its leaders cultivated relationships across Latium. They mediated disputes. They formed alliances. They offered support when advantageous. These activities strengthened Roman influence without requiring direct conquest. Other communities increasingly turned to Rome for assistance. Each successful intervention enhanced the city's prestige. Economic growth reinforced these trends. The Tiber River served as a commercial artery connecting multiple regions. Merchants passed through Roman territory carrying goods from distant markets. Agricultural production increased. Kraftindustries expanded. Trade generated wealth. That wealth funded public works. It supported military activities. It enhanced political influence. The cycle became self-reinforcing. Success created opportunities for further success. Yet not everyone welcomed Rome's rise. Within the Latin League, concerns began emerging. Traditional balances of power were shifting. Communities that had once stood as equals now faced a partner whose capabilities increasingly exceeded their own. The situation created both dependence and anxiety. Rome offered valuable leadership. Its military contributions benefited the League. Its diplomatic efforts often strengthened collective security. At the same time, growing Roman power raised uncomfortable questions. Would Rome remain merely a member of the Confederation, or would it eventually seek something more? The ancient traditions surrounding Alba Longa capture these tensions symbolically. According to later Roman accounts, conflicts arose between Rome and the older Latin center. The stories blend history and legend. Details cannot always be verified, yet the broader theme reflects historical realities. As Rome expanded, older structures of authority came under pressure. Prestige based on tradition increasingly competed with power based on practical capability. Archaeological evidence suggests major transformations occurred in the region during this period. Settlements rose and fell. Political relationships changed. Territories shifted hands. Rome consistently emerged stronger from these changes. Another key factor behind Roman success involved inclusion. Many ancient communities restricted participation in political and military life. Rome often pursued a different strategy. New populations could be incorporated. Allies could become partners. Defeated groups sometimes received opportunities unavailable elsewhere. The process was never perfectly equal. It was not driven by idealism. Rather, it reflected practical calculation. By expanding the pool of people invested in Rome's success, the city increased its own strength. Every new citizen, every allied community, every integrated population contributed manpower, resources, and loyalty. This policy would eventually become one of the foundations of Roman expansion. But in these early centuries, it was still taking shape. The effects were already visible. Rome's population grew faster than many rivals. Its military forces expanded. Its economic base diversified. Its political influence widened. The city remained part of the Latin world. It was beginning to outgrow the traditional framework within which that world operated. The transformation did not occur without resistance. Many Latin communities remained proud of their independence. They valued the Confederation's traditions. They expected equality among members. As Roman influence expanded, tensions inevitably increased. The balance that had held the League together for generations was becoming more difficult to maintain. Few people yet realized how profound the coming changes would be. The Latin League had originally formed to protect its members from external threats. Now the greatest challenge facing the Confederation would emerge from within. Because Rome's rise was no longer merely a possibility. It was becoming an undeniable reality. And the question confronting every Latin city was no longer whether Rome would become powerful. The question was what that power would mean for the future of Latium itself. The answer would eventually lead to rivalry, conflict, and a struggle that would determine whether the Latin peoples remained a confederation of equals or became subjects of a new political order centered on Rome. And that struggle was drawing closer with every passing year. As Rome grew stronger, the character of the Latin world began to change. For centuries, the Latin League had operated as a network of allied communities. No city was supposed to stand permanently above the others. Prestige existed. Influence existed. Certain settlements carried greater weight in religious matters or military affairs. Yet the ideal remained one of cooperation among independent Latin peoples. That ideal became increasingly difficult to sustain. Rome's advantages were no longer temporary. Its population continued expanding. Its territory grew. Its economy became more diversified. Its military organization improved with every generation. Success brought more success. The city accumulated resources that could be converted into further power. Meanwhile, many neighboring communities faced limitations that Rome did not. Some occupied smaller territories. Others lacked strategic locations. Others struggled with internal divisions. The gap gradually widened. At first, the changes appeared subtle. Rome took on larger responsibilities within the League. Roman commanders played important roles in military campaigns. Roman diplomats mediated disputes. Roman religious officials participated prominently in ceremonies. None of these developments seemed revolutionary on their own. Taken together, however, they reflected a deeper shift in authority. More and more often, important decisions revolve around Rome. This growing prominence generated mixed reactions. Many communities appreciated Roman leadership when external dangers threatened. The Volsci remained active along the southern frontier. The Equi continued challenging Latin territory in the east. Etruscan cities still represented major regional powers. In moments of crisis, Rome's military capabilities offered security. The problem emerged when temporary leadership began evolving into permanent influence. The distinction mattered enormously. Latin traditions valued autonomy. Each city expected to govern its own affairs. Each community possessed its own elites, institutions, and ambitions. Even allies rarely welcomed domination. As Rome's influence expanded, questions that had once seemed theoretical became increasingly urgent. Could one city lead without controlling? Could cooperation survive when power became unequal? Could the League remain a partnership if one member grew vastly stronger than the others? These questions had no easy answers. They became even more complicated because Rome's rise coincided with major transformations throughout Italy. The wider world was changing. Trade networks expanded. Population increased. Military technology evolved. Political systems grew more sophisticated. Competition intensified. Communities that failed to adapt risked decline. Those that adapted successfully gained opportunities unimaginable to previous generations. Rome adapted exceptionally well. One reason involved its willingness to absorb outside influences. Many societies viewed foreign customs with suspicion. Rome often approached them differently. If another people possessed a useful technique, Rome learned from it. If an enemy demonstrated an effective tactic, Roman commanders studied it. If foreign engineers developed superior methods, Roman builders copied them. This openness accelerated development. The city became a cultural crossroads where ideas from across Italy could be combined and refined. The influence of the Etruscans remained particularly important. Even as political rivalry continued, cultural exchange flourished. Roman architecture increasingly reflected Etruscan models. Engineering techniques improved. Religious symbolism expanded. Elements of political organization evolved. Roman leaders absorbed lessons from civilization that had already achieved a high degree of urban sophistication. The process was not imitation. It was adaptation. Rome selected what proved useful and integrated it into its own traditions. The result was a society capable of innovation without abandoning its identity. Military organization underwent similar evolution. Ancient warfare rewarded flexibility. Rigid systems often struggled when confronting unfamiliar enemies. Rome repeatedly demonstrated an ability to adjust. Conflicts with mountain tribes required different approaches than battles fought on open plains. Wars against Etruscan cities demanded different strategies than raids against smaller communities. Each challenge encouraged experimentation. Gradually, Roman forces became more disciplined and adaptable than many of their rivals. The importance of discipline cannot be overstated. Ancient battles frequently collapsed into chaos. Fear spread quickly. Formations broke apart. Victories often depended as much on organization as courage. Roman commanders increasingly emphasized coordination. Soldiers trained together. Units learned to operate collectively. Command structures became more reliable. These developments did not guarantee victory, but they improved Rome's chances whenever conflicts occurred. And conflicts occurred frequently. Central Italy remained a competitive environment. Territory mattered. Resources mattered. Prestige mattered. Communities constantly maneuvered for advantage. Sometimes disputes ended through negotiation. Sometimes they ended through war. Rome became increasingly effective at both. The city also benefited from another important characteristic. Its political system, though far from democratic by modern standards, allowed broader participation than many neighboring societies. Different groups possessed avenues for advancement. Ambitious individuals could gain influence through military service, political leadership, or public achievement. This flexibility helped Rome mobilize talent. Capable leaders emerged generation after generation. The city proved remarkably resilient when confronting internal challenges. That resilience impressed allies and alarmed rivals. Throughout Latium, people watched Rome's growth with increasing attention. Some viewed it as the protector of Latin interests. Others saw an emerging threat. Many felt both simultaneously. The contradiction lay at the heart of Rome's relationship with the League. The city genuinely contributed to collective security. Its successes often benefited allied communities. Yet every Roman victory also increased Roman power. Every expansion of influence shifted the balance further. Every achievement raised new concerns about the future. Ancient traditions preserve echoes of these tensions. Stories about conflicts between Rome and neighboring Latin communities appear repeatedly in later historical accounts. Although details are often difficult to verify, the broader pattern is clear. Cooperation and competition existed side by side. Allies could become rivals. Partners could become opponents. Shared identity did not eliminate political ambition. One of the most significant examples involves Alba Longa. According to Roman tradition, Alba Longa occupied a special place within Latin history. It represented ancestral authority, a connection to the deepest roots of Latin identity. Yet traditions also describe conflict between Alba Longa and Rome. The narratives are heavily shaped by later Roman interpretations. Still, they reflect an important historical reality. As Rome expanded, older centers of prestige lost relative influence. Power increasingly shifted toward the city on the Tiber. Archaeological evidence supports the broader picture of regional transformation. Some settlements declined. Others disappeared. Population concentrated in emerging urban centers. Political landscapes evolved. Rome consistently gained from these changes. Whether through diplomacy, migration, alliance, or conquest, the city absorbed people and resources from surrounding territories. This process strengthened Rome, while weakening alternative centers of authority. The consequences reached beyond politics. Religion also changed. Traditional Latin sanctuaries remained important. The Feri Latini continued attracting participants from across the region. Pilgrims still climbed the slopes of the Alban Hills. Sacrifices still honored Jupiter Latiaris. Ancient customs endured. Yet Rome's growing prominence increasingly influenced even these sacred traditions. Roman magistrates assumed more visible roles. Roman religious authority expanded. Ceremonies that once symbolized equality among league members gradually reflected Roman leadership. The transformation was subtle. No single event marked the shift. Rather, influence accumulated year after year. The same pattern appeared in diplomacy. Communities facing disputes increasingly sought Roman mediation. Roman leaders acquired reputations as negotiators. Their involvement often helped resolve conflicts. At the same time, every successful intervention enhanced Roman prestige. Dependence grew. Influence deepened. The distinction between assistance and authority became increasingly blurred. Economic developments reinforced these trends. Rome's position on the Tiber provided exceptional advantages. Commercial traffic expanded steadily. Merchants brought goods from distant regions. Markets grew. Craft production increased. Agricultural surpluses supported larger populations. Economic success generated revenue. Revenue funded military activity. Military success encouraged further expansion. The cycle repeated itself. Meanwhile, other Latin cities struggled to match Rome's momentum. Even prosperous communities found themselves operating within a regional environment increasingly shaped by Roman decisions. The issue was not simply military strength. It was scale. Rome's resources expanded faster than those of its neighbors. Its population increased more rapidly. Its political networks reached farther. Its strategic position offered opportunities unavailable elsewhere. The cumulative effect transformed the city into something unprecedented within the Latin world. By the 5th century BC, the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. The League still existed. Shared religious traditions continued. Collective memories remained powerful. Yet practical realities increasingly revolved around Rome. Many Latin communities recognized the benefits. Many also feared the implications. These fears intensified whenever Roman ambitions appeared to conflict with traditional confederation principles. The original purpose of the League had been mutual defense. Its members expected consultation, shared decision-making, respect for autonomy. Roman leaders did not necessarily reject those ideals outright, but their actions increasingly reflected the priorities of a city whose interests extended beyond the traditional framework of Latin politics. Rome was beginning to think on a larger scale. The city no longer viewed itself merely as one Latin community among many. Its horizons expanded. Its ambitions grew. Its leaders envisioned opportunities stretching beyond Latium. Those ambitions brought Rome into contact with new enemies, new territories, new possibilities, and each new success further altered the relationship between Rome and its fellow Latins. Conflicts with the Volsci illustrate the process. These struggles lasted for generations. Military campaigns consumed resources and manpower. Roman victories enhanced security. They also produced territorial gains. The benefits rarely remained evenly distributed. Rome often emerged from these conflicts stronger than its allies. Land changed hands. Settlements expanded. Influence increased. Other Latin communities contributed soldiers and resources. Yet Rome frequently captured the largest rewards. Such patterns created resentment. Not immediately, not everywhere, but gradually. Political tensions accumulated over time. Small grievances became larger ones. Questions of fairness became questions of power. Was Rome still acting as a partner? Or was it becoming a master? Different communities answered differently. Yet the debate itself revealed how much the situation had changed. Generations earlier, such questions would have seemed unimaginable. Now they stood at the center of Latin politics. The issue became even more significant because Rome possessed another powerful advantage. It excelled at integrating conquered populations. Many ancient states ruled subject peoples through exclusion. Rome increasingly pursued a different strategy. Defeated communities could receive varying degrees of incorporation. Allies could gain privileges. Individuals could rise within Roman systems. The approach was pragmatic rather than humanitarian. Its purpose was strength. By expanding the number of people invested in Rome's success, the city increased its own capabilities. The policy produced remarkable results. Population growth accelerated. Military manpower expanded. Economic networks widened. Rome became stronger not despite integration, but because of it. Many rival communities struggled to compete with this model. Their political structures remained narrower. Their populations remained smaller. Their resources remained limited. Rome's ability to absorb rather than merely dominate gave it a significant advantage. By now, the old balance within Latium was clearly disappearing. The League remained alive. Its ceremonies continued. Its traditions endured. Yet beneath the surface, a new reality had emerged. Rome stood at the center of regional politics. Not officially, not yet, but increasingly in practice. The city's leaders understood this. Many neighboring communities understood it as well. The question was no longer whether Rome would become the dominant power among the Latins. The question was whether the other Latin cities would accept that dominance. For a time, compromise remained possible. Shared traditions still carried weight. External threats still encouraged cooperation. Religious unity still provided common ground. But beneath these stabilizing forces, dissatisfaction was growing. Communities that had once viewed themselves as equal partners now found their influence diminishing. Ancient rites seemed less secure. Traditional expectations seemed less respected. And as Rome continued expanding its power, many Latins began wondering whether the confederation they had built generations earlier was being transformed into something entirely different. Those concerns would not remain theoretical forever. They would eventually erupt into one of the most important conflicts in the history of ancient Italy. A conflict that would decide whether the Latin League survived as an alliance of independent peoples, or whether Rome would finally replace cooperation with control. And when that confrontation came, it would change the destiny of the Latin world forever. By the middle of the 4th century BC, the Latin world stood at a crossroads. For generations, Rome and the other Latin communities had shared victories, dangers, religious traditions, and political institutions. The Latin League had survived external threats that might once have destroyed it. Together, they had resisted powerful enemies. Together, they had defended their territories. Together, they had preserved a common identity in a constantly changing Italy. Yet success had created a new problem. The League had been designed for a world in which its members possessed roughly comparable power. That world no longer existed. Rome had outgrown the structure that once united the Latins. Its population dwarfed many neighboring communities. Its armies were larger. Its resources were greater. Its influence stretched farther than ever before. The old balance had disappeared. The institutions remained. The ceremonies continued. The language of equality survived. But the realities beneath the surface had changed dramatically. Rome increasingly acted according to Roman interests. The other Latin cities increasingly viewed those interests with suspicion. The tension developed gradually. No single event shattered the alliance. Instead, years of frustration accumulated. Each dispute added another layer. Each perceived insult deepened resentment. Each Roman success widened the gap between leader and partner. Many Latin aristocrats had spent generations participating in the political life of the League. Their families commanded armies. They negotiated treaties. They presided over religious ceremonies. Their status depended upon the idea that Latin communities remained autonomous members of a confederation. As Rome's influence expanded, these traditional elites saw their authority diminishing. The problem was not simply pride. It was power. If Rome dominated decision-making, local leaders lost influence. If Rome directed military operations, local commanders became subordinate. If Rome controlled expansion, local communities lost opportunities. The issue affected every aspect of political life. One of the most important sources of tension involved colonization. Throughout ancient Italy, the establishment of colonies served multiple purposes. Colonies secured territory, protected trade routes, expanded agricultural production, provided land for growing populations, strengthened political influence. For generations, such activities had often occurred within broader confederation frameworks. Important decisions required consultation. Benefits were expected to be shared. Rome increasingly ignored these expectations. Roman colonies appeared in strategically valuable regions. Roman settlers received land. Roman influence expanded. Meanwhile, many Latin communities felt excluded from decisions that affected territories they considered part of their collective sphere of interest. From Rome's perspective, these policies made sense. The city carried much of the burden for military defense. Its armies fought major campaigns. Its resources financed expansion. Roman leaders argued that Rome deserved a larger role in determining the future of central Italy. Many Latins disagreed. They remembered older traditions. They remembered a league of partners rather than subjects. As these disagreements intensified, military matters became another source of conflict. The Latin League had long relied on cooperation during warfare. Member communities supplied soldiers according to their capabilities. Leadership responsibilities were distributed. Victories benefited the alliance as a whole. Over time, however, Roman commanders assumed increasingly dominant roles. Joint operations became Roman-led operations. Latin contingents still fought. They still bled. They still contributed manpower. Yet they exercised less influence over strategic decisions. For aristocratic families whose prestige depended upon military leadership, this shift was deeply troubling. The issue extended beyond personal ambition. Military service formed the foundation of political authority throughout the ancient world. Communities that lost influence within military structures often lost influence elsewhere as well. Latin leaders understood exactly what was happening. The more Rome centralized command, the more dependent the League became upon Roman leadership. Dependence gradually eroded autonomy. At the same time, Rome's expanding diplomatic activity created further concerns. Roman officials increasingly negotiated treaties affecting the broader region without consulting lead partners. Agreements with neighboring peoples, military arrangements, territorial settlements. Decisions that once might have required confederation discussion increasingly emerged from Roman initiatives alone. To Roman leaders, these actions reflected practical necessity. The political environment was becoming more complex. Threats required rapid responses. Opportunities demanded decisive action. Consultation slowed decision-making. Rome believed it possessed the experience and resources necessary to lead. Many Latins interpreted the same behavior differently. To them, it appeared that Rome no longer respected the principles upon which the League had been founded. The turning point came during the decades surrounding the Samnite conflicts. The Samnites occupied mountainous territories south and east of Latium. They were formidable opponents, skilled warriors, determined defenders, powerful regional actors. Their interactions with Rome would shape the future of Italy. When conflicts involving the Samnites intensified, Rome increasingly pursued policies based upon its own strategic priorities. In some cases, Roman decisions committed resources and allies to campaigns without meaningful consultation. The implications were profound. Latin communities found themselves expected to support military operations whose objectives they had not approved. They provided soldiers. They supplied resources. They accepted risks. Yet their influence over policy continued shrinking. Resentment spread. Many communities concluded that the Confederation no longer functioned as intended. The League still existed in name, but Rome appeared to be transforming it into an instrument of Roman policy. By the 340s BC, dissatisfaction had become widespread. Conversations that once occurred privately now entered public political life. Latin leaders debated the future of their relationship with Rome. Some favored compromise. Others argued for stronger resistance. Still others believed that only dramatic action could preserve Latin independence. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals increasing military preparations throughout parts of Latium. Fortifications were repaired. Defensive positions strengthened. Weapons accumulated. Communities clearly anticipated instability. Ancient Italy was no stranger to conflict. Political disagreements often ended on the battlefield. The growing tensions between Rome and its allies raised an alarming possibility. Could the Latin League itself be moving towards civil war? The idea would have seemed shocking to earlier generations. The League had been created to unite the Latins. Now the greatest threat to that unity came from within. The crisis deepened when Latin representatives sought major political reforms. Ancient sources preserve accounts of demands presented to Rome. Though details vary, the central issue is clear. Latin leaders wanted genuine equality restored. They wanted meaningful participation in decision-making. They wanted recognition that the League remained a partnership rather than a hierarchy. Some proposals went even further. According to later traditions, certain Latin leaders envisioned a political arrangement in which Romans and Latins shared institutions on equal terms. Whether these specific proposals accurately reflect historical events remains debated. What matters is the broader reality they reveal. Many Latins no longer accepted the existing relationship. They wanted change. Rome refused. From the Roman perspective, the demands were unacceptable. The city had invested decades building its position. Its leaders believed Roman sacrifices justified Roman authority. Conceding equality now would undermine everything Rome had achieved. Moreover, many Roman politicians feared that sharing power too broadly would weaken the state precisely when external challenges demanded strength and unity. The gap between the two sides became impossible to bridge. Negotiations failed. Mutual distrust hardened. Political disagreement evolved into open confrontation. Ba approached. When the conflict finally erupted in 340 BC, it became known as the Latin War. The struggle would last only a few years. Its consequences would reshape Italy forever. The war was not merely a military contest. It was a battle over competing visions of the future. The Latins fought to preserve autonomy. Rome fought to secure leadership. Both sides believed their cause justified. Both sides claimed to defend legitimate traditions. Both sides drew upon centuries of shared history. That shared history made the conflict especially painful. This was not a war between strangers. It was a war between peoples connected by language, religion, culture, and ancestry. Many soldiers on opposite sides probably shared common traditions. Some may even have shared family connections extending across community boundaries. The tragedy reflected the breakdown of a political system that could no longer accommodate changing realities. As preparations accelerated, both sides sought allies. Rome worked to secure support among communities that remained loyal. Diplomatic missions traveled throughout Italy. Negotiations intensified. Old rivalries suddenly became strategic considerations. The Latins pursued similar efforts. They understood that defeating Rome would require broad cooperation. No single city could challenge Roman power alone. Support from neighboring peoples became essential. The resulting political landscape grew extraordinarily complex. Alliances shifted. Neutrality became difficult. Every community faced pressure to choose a side. The conflict that emerged would involve not only Romans and Latins, but also a wider network of Italian peoples whose futures were increasingly tied to the outcome. Roman commanders prepared carefully. They recognized the seriousness of the threat. Unlike many previous conflicts, this war involved opponents who understood Roman methods intimately. The Latins had fought alongside Roman armies for generations. They knew Roman tactics. They knew Roman organization. They knew Roman strengths. That familiarity made them dangerous enemies. The Latins possessed advantages of their own. Their warriors were experienced. Their leaders understood the terrain. Their cause inspired strong support among communities determined to defend their independence. Many believed they were fighting not only for political rights, but for the survival of a way of life. The stakes could hardly have been higher. If Rome lost, its ambitions might collapse. The League could regain its autonomy. A different political future might emerge for Italy. If Rome won, the old confederation would almost certainly cease to exist in its traditional form. The entire structure of Latin politics would be transformed. As armies assembled and diplomacy gave way to military action, generations of shared history hung in the balance. The institutions created centuries earlier on the slopes of the Alban Hills were approaching their final test. The league that had once united the Latins against external threats now faced destruction through conflict among its own members. And when the fighting began, it would determine not only the fate of Latium, but the future course of Roman expansion across the entire Italian peninsula. The world that emerged afterward would look very different from the one the founders of the Latin League had known. Because the coming war would not simply decide who held power. It would decide whether the Latin peoples remained independent actors in history or became part of a larger Roman state whose ambitions were only beginning to reveal themselves. By the year 340 BC, the tension that had been building for generations could no longer be contained. Diplomatic efforts had failed. Political compromise had collapsed. Mutual suspicion had hardened into open hostility. The relationship between Rome and many of its Latin allies had reached a breaking point. The result was a conflict that would permanently alter the history of central Italy. To understand why this war mattered so deeply, it is important to remember what was truly at stake. The struggle was not simply about territory. It was not merely a contest over military prestige. It was a battle over the political future of the Latin peoples. For centuries, the Latin League had served as the framework through which independent communities cooperated while preserving their autonomy. The system was imperfect. It evolved constantly. It faced challenges, yet it allowed dozens of cities and settlements to maintain their identities while participating in a broader cultural and political world. Now, that system stood in danger of destruction. Rome believed that stronger centralized leadership was necessary. Many Latins believed that such leadership would inevitably become domination. Both sides viewed themselves as defenders of legitimate traditions. Both sides believed the future depended upon victory. Ancient historians writing centuries later preserved dramatic accounts of the conflict. As with many early Roman wars, separating fact from later storytelling can be difficult. Speeches were often invented. Details were sometimes embellished. Yet beneath these literary additions lies a genuine historical struggle whose consequences are unmistakable. The opening stages of the war involved intense maneuvering. Neither side rushed blindly into battle. Military leaders understood the risks. Rome faced opponents who knew Roman methods well. The Latins faced an enemy whose military organization had become increasingly formidable. Each side sought favorable positions. Each side attempted to secure alliances. Each side looked for strategic advantages that might determine the outcome. The wider political situation complicated matters further. Various Italian peoples observed the conflict closely. Some saw opportunities. Others feared becoming trapped between competing powers. Old rivalries influenced decisions. Regional politics became intertwined with military planning. The war unfolded within a broader struggle for influence across Italy. One of the earliest major confrontations occurred near Mount Vesuvius. Today, the mountain is famous for the volcanic eruption that destroyed Pompeii centuries later. In the 4th century BC, however, it served as the backdrop for one of the most important battles in early Roman history. Roman forces advanced into Campania. Latin and allied troops moved to challenge them. The stage was set for a confrontation that would help determine the future of the conflict. Ancient accounts emphasize Roman discipline during these campaigns. Whether every detail is accurate remains uncertain. What seems clear is that Roman military organization provided significant advantages. Years of warfare had produced experienced officers. Command structures functioned effectively. Units operated with increasing coordination. The Roman army was becoming something different from the citizen militias that had once characterized much of central Italy. It remained composed largely of citizens, but its level of organization continued improving. The Latins fought fiercely. They possessed considerable military experience themselves. Many had spent years campaigning alongside Roman forces. They understood battlefield realities. They were not inexperienced opponents. Yet cooperation among multiple allied contingents sometimes created challenges. Different communities maintained different traditions. Different commanders held different priorities. Coordination proved difficult under the pressure of battle. The fighting near Vesuvius demonstrated these contrasting strengths and weaknesses. Roman forces managed to maintain cohesion. Their formations held. Their command system functioned under stress. Latin and allied forces struggled to achieve the same degree of unity. The battle ended in a Roman victory. The consequences extended beyond immediate casualties. Success strengthened Roman confidence. It secured important strategic positions. It also sent a powerful message throughout Italy. Rome remained a formidable military power despite the rebellion of many former allies. Yet the war was far from over. Latin resistance did not collapse after a single defeat. Communities regrouped. New plans emerged. Leaders sought opportunities to reverse Roman gains. The struggle entered a new phase. Throughout central Italy, fortified settlements prepared for prolonged conflict. Archaeological evidence reveals signs of military activity in numerous locations. Defensive works were strengthened. Supplies accumulated. Communities prepared for the possibility of sieges and extended campaigns. War affected everyday life. Farmers left fields to serve in armies. Trade routes became less secure. Resources were redirected toward military needs. Entire regions experienced disruption. For ordinary people, political conflicts translated into uncertainty and hardship. The next major stage of the war involved Roman efforts to prevent Latin forces from establishing secure defensive positions. Mountainous terrain offered opportunities for resistance. Communities familiar with local landscapes could potentially prolong the conflict indefinitely. Roman commanders understood the danger. A quick victory required decisive action. Allowing the war to drag on would increase costs and create opportunities for new enemies to intervene. The campaign, therefore, became increasingly aggressive. Roman armies pursued retreating opponents. Strategic locations were targeted. Pressure intensified. Eventually, both sides moved toward what would become the decisive confrontation of the war, the Battle of Tryphaenum. Although modern historians continue debating certain details, the battle clearly represented a turning point. By this stage, the conflict had exhausted many participants. Years of warfare strained resources. Communities faced mounting losses. The need for a conclusive outcome grew increasingly urgent. The battlefield offered terrain favorable to Roman tactics. Open areas allowed disciplined formations to maneuver effectively. Roman commanders exploited these advantages. Their troops advanced in coordinated formations. Cavalry protected vulnerable positions. Communication remained relatively efficient. Latin forces fought with determination. The stakes were obvious. Defeat would threaten not only military success, but the political independence of entire communities. For many participants, the battle represented the final opportunity to preserve the traditional structure of the Latin world. The fighting was intense. Ancient battles often involved hours of brutal close combat. Victory rarely came quickly. Men pushed against opposing formations. Spears shattered. Swords broke. Exhaustion accumulated. Commanders struggled to maintain control amid confusion and violence. At Tryphaenum, Roman organization gradually proved decisive. Units supported one another. Formations adapted to changing circumstances. Pressure increased along critical sectors of the battlefield. Eventually, Latin resistance began to weaken. The collapse did not occur all at once. Some units fought stubbornly. Others attempted organized withdrawal. Yet as communication deteriorated and casualties mounted, the overall position became unsustainable. The defeat was devastating. The military consequences were immediate. Organized resistance largely disintegrated. Communities that had hoped for victory suddenly faced a stark reality. Rome had won. The political consequences would prove even more significant. The Latin League had effectively lost the ability to challenge Roman authority through collective action. Its armies were broken, its leadership divided, its future uncertain. Many communities now faced a difficult choice: continue resisting individually and risk destruction, or negotiate terms with Rome. One by one, cities began confronting this dilemma. Some sought accommodation quickly. Others hesitated. A few attempted further resistance. But the balance of power had shifted decisively. Rome possessed the military strength necessary to impose a new political order. The old confederation could not survive in its previous form. For centuries, the League had functioned as the central institution of Latin political life. Now it faced dissolution. The process unfolded gradually, but unmistakably. Rome no longer treated the Latin communities as members of a collective alliance. Instead, individual cities negotiated directly with Roman authorities. This change was revolutionary. The Confederation's greatest strength had always been unity. By dealing separately with each community, Rome eliminated that advantage. No common front remained. No collective bargaining power survived. Each city stood alone before the growing power of Rome. The strategy was remarkably effective. Communities received different terms based upon their circumstances. Some obtained favorable treatment. Others faced harsher conditions. The diversity of arrangements prevented the emergence of unified opposition. Local interests replaced Confederation solidarity. The League ceased functioning as an independent political force. Rome's approach demonstrated considerable sophistication. Rather than imposing identical solutions everywhere, Roman leaders tailored settlements to specific situations. Communities that cooperated often received rewards. Those that resisted more stubbornly sometimes faced penalties. Flexibility became a tool of control. The policy reduced resistance while encouraging loyalty. One of the most significant aspects of the settlement involved citizenship. Rome developed innovative categories of political status. Some communities received full Roman citizenship. Others obtained limited rights. Still others maintained forms of local autonomy while accepting Roman oversight. This variety allowed Rome to integrate territories without requiring complete uniformity. The approach would eventually become one of the defining features of Roman expansion. For many Latin communities, the changes brought mixed emotions. Political independence diminished. Ancient traditions of confederation government disappeared. Yet integration also offered opportunities. Access to Roman markets expanded. Legal protections increased. Connections to a growing power provided security. The transformation was neither entirely oppressive nor entirely voluntary. It reflected a complex process in which gains and losses existed simultaneously. Religious traditions survived more successfully than political institutions. The sacred festivals continued. Pilgrimages to the Alban Hills persisted. The worship of Jupiter Latiaris remained important. Rome understood the value of religious continuity. Ancient ceremonies possessed deep emotional significance. Suppressing them would create unnecessary resentment. Instead, Roman authorities preserved many traditions while placing them under Roman supervision. The symbolism changed. The rituals remained. This distinction mattered enormously. The Feriae Latini continued to take place. Representatives still gathered. Sacrifices still occurred. Yet the festival no longer celebrated a confederation of equal communities. It now reflected a Latin world organized around Roman leadership. The transformation captured the broader reality of the post-war settlement. Continuity and change existed side by side. The outward appearance of many traditions survived. The political meaning behind them evolved. Meanwhile, Roman influence expanded rapidly. Former Latin territories became increasingly integrated into Roman systems. Roads improved. Commercial connections strengthened. Military obligations expanded. Administrative relationships deepened. The process unfolded over decades. Its effects would last for centuries. Many people living through these events probably struggled to grasp their full significance. They witnessed local changes, political reforms, military obligations, new legal arrangements. What they could not easily see was the emergence of a new model of territorial governance. Rome was developing methods that would eventually allow it to control vast regions far beyond Latium. The settlement of the Latin War served as a testing ground. Policies that succeeded here would later be applied across Italy and eventually throughout the Mediterranean world. The conflict therefore marked more than the end of the Latin League. It marked the beginning of something much larger. Rome had demonstrated that it could defeat allied communities. More importantly, it had demonstrated that it could incorporate them afterward. Conquest alone rarely creates lasting power. Integration does. The Romans were becoming masters of integration, and as the decades passed, that skill would allow them to build a state unlike any the Mediterranean had seen before. Yet even as Roman authority expanded, the memory of the old Latin world did not disappear. Communities preserved their local traditions. Families remembered ancestral stories. Religious customs endured. The legacy of the League survived within cultural memory long after its political institutions vanished. In many ways, the Latins had lost their independence, but they had not disappeared. Instead, they were becoming part of a larger Roman identity that still carried traces of its Latin origins. The transformation was profound. The people who had once gathered on the Alban Hills as equal members of a confederation were now entering a new era. An era in which Rome stood not as one Latin city among many, but as the dominant power shaping the future of Italy. And the next challenge facing Rome would be even greater. Having secured control over the Latin world, the Republic now turned its attention toward the rest of the peninsula. The struggle that had begun among neighboring communities was about to expand into a contest for all of Italy. The end of the Latin War did not erase the Latin peoples. It transformed them. That distinction is crucial. Many histories focus on Rome's victories and move quickly past the communities that lost their independence. Yet the story of the Latins did not end when the League was dissolved. In many ways, it entered a new phase. The centuries that followed would witness one of the most remarkable political transformations in ancient history. Communities that had once fought Rome would gradually become essential components of Roman power itself. The process was neither simple nor immediate. Suspicion remained. Old grievances lingered. Memories of independence survived. Families remembered a time when their cities governed themselves without Roman oversight. Local traditions remained strong. Religious festivals continued. Municipala identitas persistiv. The people of Tusculum still knew they were from Tusculum. The people of Aricia still knew they were from Aricia. The people of Lavinium still honored their own sacred history. Yet slowly, year after year, these local identities began existing alongside a broader Roman identity. Rome encouraged this development. The Republic's leaders understood something that many ancient states failed to grasp. Permanent domination through force alone is expensive. Armies require resources. Occupation creates resistance. Fear can compel obedience, but it rarely creates loyalty. Rome sought something more durable. It sought participation. The settlements created after the Latin War reveal this strategy clearly. Rather than reducing all conquered communities to identical status, Rome developed a range of legal relationships. Some cities received full Roman citizenship. Others received partial rights. Some retained local institutions while accepting Roman authority over foreign policy and military obligations. The system was complex. At times it seemed confusing even to ancient observers. Yet its flexibility became one of Rome's greatest strengths. Different communities could be integrated at different speeds. Different privileges could be granted according to circumstance. Political loyalty could be rewarded. Resistance could be discouraged. This approach produced remarkable results. Instead of creating a large population of permanently hostile subjects, Rome gradually expanded the number of people who had a direct stake in Roman success. Citizenship became a powerful tool. For modern audiences, citizenship often appears as a legal concept. In the ancient world, it represented something much larger. Citizenship provided protection, economic opportunities, legal rights, social prestige, political participation, access to the growing power of Rome itself. Communities that obtained these privileges increasingly viewed their future as connected to the Republic. The military system played an equally important role. Former Latin allies now supplied soldiers to Roman armies. At first, this arrangement may have seemed like a burden. Military service demanded sacrifice. Campaigns removed men from farms and families. Battles brought danger. Yet service also created opportunities. Soldiers gained experience. They forged relationships across regional boundaries. They shared victories. They acquired wealth through military success. Most importantly, they became participants in a larger political project. As Roman armies expanded across Italy, thousands of men from former Latin communities marched alongside Roman citizens. Together, they fought common enemies. Together, they celebrated victories. Together, they contributed to the creation of a new Italy. This shared military experience gradually altered perceptions. The distinction between Roman and Latin began to blur. The process accelerated through colonization. Rome established colonies throughout strategic regions. Some served military purposes. Others secured trade routes. Many helped integrate newly acquired territories. These settlements became engines of cultural change. Colonists carried Roman laws, Roman customs, Roman language, Roman religious practices, yet they also carried local traditions from the communities they left behind. The result was not cultural replacement. It was cultural blending. A Roman colony might include settlers from multiple regions. Former Latins, Romans, allied Italians. Different traditions interacted. Over time, new local identities emerged. Archaeology reveals this process vividly. Across Italy, excavations show communities adopting Roman architectural styles while preserving local customs. Public buildings reflected Roman influence. Domestic spaces often retained older traditions. Religious sites combined local deities with Roman religious forms. The evidence demonstrates adaptation rather than simple assimilation. People rarely abandoned their past entirely. Instead, they incorporated new identities into existing frameworks. Language illustrates this transformation particularly well. Latin had always been the language of the Latins. Now, it became the language of expanding Roman influence. As Roman authority spread, Latin spread with it. Administrators used it. Soldiers spoke it. Merchants conducted business in it. Legal documents employed it. Over time, communities across Italy increasingly adopted Latin as a practical means of communication. The process unfolded gradually. Many local languages survived for centuries. Oscan remained important in parts of southern Italy. Umbrian continued elsewhere. Regional dialects persisted. Yet the advantages of Latin became increasingly obvious. It connected people to commerce, government, military service, social advancement. The language of a small region was becoming the language of a growing state. This development carried enormous historical consequences. Eventually, Latin would spread far beyond Italy. It would influence countless languages, shape legal systems, provide vocabulary for science, religion, and government. But those future achievements rested upon the transformations taking place during these centuries. The integration of the Latin peoples formed the foundation. Religion evolved as well. The old sacred traditions remained surprisingly resilient. The sanctuary of Jupiter Latiaris continued attracting worshippers. Pilgrimages persisted. Ancient ceremonies survived. Rome did not seek to eliminate these practices. Instead, it incorporated them into broader religious structures. The strategy reflected political wisdom. Destroying beloved traditions creates resistance. Preserving them encourages cooperation. Roman religion itself proved highly adaptable. New gods could be welcomed. Local cults could be recognized. Foreign traditions could be integrated. This flexibility mirrored Rome's broader approach to governance. Inclusion often proved more effective than exclusion. As decades passed, the distinction between Roman and Latin religious life became increasingly difficult to separate. The same process occurred in politics. Local councils remained active. Municipal institutions survivaient. Community leaders continued managing local affairs. Yet these activities increasingly operated within Roman frameworks. Authority flowed through Roman systems. Legal decisions reflected Roman principles. Military obligations connected local communities to larger strategic objectives. The result was a layered identity. People remained loyal to their hometowns. They also became participants in the Roman Republic. This dual identity helped stabilize the expanding state. Rome did not demand that people forget who they were. It encouraged them to add a new identity alongside existing ones. The effectiveness of this approach became clear as Rome expanded beyond Latium. The Republic faced increasingly powerful enemies. The Samnites challenged Roman ambitions in central and southern Italy. Greek cities in the south defended their independence. Various tribal peoples resisted incorporation. Each conflict tested Rome's institutions. Each victory increased its responsibilities. Success required manpower, resources, organization. The former Latin communities provided all three. Without them, Roman expansion would have been far more difficult. The irony is striking. The people who had once resisted Roman leadership became essential contributors to Roman success. Their soldiers fought in Roman armies. Their resources supported Roman campaigns. Their communities supplied administrators, merchants, and settlers. The Republic's rise depended not only on conquest, but on integration. Military victories opened opportunities. Political inclusion made those victories sustainable. The broader Italian world observed these developments closely. Some communities feared Roman power. Others recognized advantages in cooperation. The varying responses shaped the next stages of Roman expansion. Yet one reality became increasingly clear. Rome was no longer merely a city. It was becoming the center of a vast network of communities connected through military service, economic exchange, legal institutions, and shared political interests. The Latins occupied a unique position within this network. Unlike many later peoples incorporated into Roman territory, they shared deep cultural roots with Rome itself. Their language formed the basis of Roman speech. Their religious traditions influenced Roman worship. Their political institutions shaped Roman ideas. Their history intertwined with Rome's history from the very beginning. In a sense, the Latins did not simply become part of Rome. They helped define what Rome was. Ancient writers recognized this connection. Even as Rome celebrated its achievements, it continued honoring Latin origins. The memory of shared ancestry remained important. Foundation myths linked Romans and Latins together. Religious ceremonies preserved ancient connections. Historical traditions emphasized common heritage. These narratives served political purposes, but they also reflected genuine cultural realities. The Roman world emerged from the Latin world. One cannot be understood without the other. By the 3rd century BC, the transformation was becoming unmistakable. The old league belonged to history. Independent Latin politics had largely disappeared. Yet Latin influence permeated the expanding republic. Former league territories formed the core of Roman Italy. Their population supplied manpower. Their farms produced food. Their roads connected regions. Their traditions enriched Roman culture. Far from vanishing, the Latins had become central to a much larger story. And that larger story was accelerating. Rome's victories against neighboring peoples opened new horizons. The Republic's ambitions expanded beyond central Italy. New enemies appeared. New opportunities emerged. The scale of Roman activity grew dramatically. What had once been a regional power was becoming a peninsular power. Soon it would become something even greater. Yet as Rome looked outward, another challenge was beginning to emerge from within. The system that had successfully integrated the Latins would eventually face new pressures. Questions about citizenship, rights, political participation, representation. These issues would return in different forms. And centuries after the Latin League disappeared, they would help spark one of the most significant conflicts in Roman history. A conflict that would once again place the descendants of the ancient Latins at the center of Italy's future. By the 2nd century BC, the world of the ancient Latins would have been almost unrecognizable to their distant ancestors. The small hilltop settlements that once overlooked volcanic valleys had become parts of a vast and increasingly interconnected political system. The Latin League was gone. The old Confederation assemblies no longer governed regional affairs. Independent Latin diplomacy had disappeared. The balance of power that once existed among the communities of Latium had long since faded into memory. And yet, despite all of these changes, the Latins themselves had not vanished. In many ways, they had achieved something far more remarkable. They had become inseparable from Rome. Their language had become Rome's language. Their religious traditions had become part of Roman religion. Their institutions had influenced Roman political development. Their homeland formed the heartland of the Republic. The success of Rome and the success of the Latin peoples had become intertwined. Yet success brought new challenges. As Roman territory expanded across Italy and far beyond, the political system struggled to keep pace. Communities that contributed soldiers, taxes, and resources increasingly demanded a greater share in the benefits of Roman power. The issues that once divided Rome and the Latin League began appearing again in new forms. Questions about equality, questions about citizenship, questions about representation, questions about who truly belonged within the Roman political community. For generations, Rome had expanded through a flexible system of alliances and varying legal statuses. Some communities possessed full citizenship. Others held partial rights. Others remained allies with special obligations. This system had helped Rome conquer Italy. But by the 1st century BC, it was creating growing tensions. Many Italian communities had fought loyally for Rome for generations. Their soldiers had died in Roman wars. Their leaders had supported Roman policies. Their economies had become deeply integrated into Roman commerce. Yet many still lacked the full political rights enjoyed by Roman citizens. The contradiction became increasingly difficult to justify. Among those who recognized the danger was Marcus Livius Drusus. In 91 BC, he attempted to address the growing crisis. His proposals sought to extend citizenship more broadly to Rome's Italian allies. He understood that the existing system could not continue indefinitely. Communities that shared Rome's burdens increasingly expected to share its privileges. Drusus believed reform offered the best path forward, but reform proved controversial. Powerful interests opposed change. Political conflict intensified. Then Drusus was assassinated. His death shocked Italy. More importantly, it convinced many allied communities that peaceful solutions might be impossible. The result was one of the most serious internal conflicts in Roman history. The Social War. The name can be misleading to modern ears. It does not refer to society in the modern sense. Rather, it derives from the Latin word for allies. This was a war between Rome and many of the communities that had long stood beside it. Among them were descendants of peoples who had once belonged to the broader Latin world. The conflict erupted in 91 BC and spread rapidly across Italy. Communities that had served Rome for generations now rebelled. Their demands centered on a single issue: citizenship. They no longer wished to remain allies. They wanted equality. The irony was extraordinary. Centuries earlier, many Latins had fought Rome to preserve independence. Now their descendants fought for inclusion. The struggle revealed how deeply Italy had changed. The goal was no longer separation from Rome. The goal was participation within Rome. The rebels created their own political structures. They established administrative institutions. They minted coins. They organized armies. For a time, they posed a genuine threat to Roman authority. The war was brutal. Ancient sources describe fierce campaigns. Cities changed hands. Entire regions suffered devastation. Roman armies fought experienced opponents who understood Roman tactics and organization. Victory would not come easily. Yet Rome eventually recognized an important reality. Military success alone could not solve the problem. The grievances driving the rebellion were legitimate. Continued resistance would persist unless the underlying issues were addressed. As a result, Roman leaders adopted a strategy combining military pressure with political concessions. Laws were passed offering citizenship to loyal communities. Additional legislation extended opportunities to former rebels willing to lay down their arms. Gradually, the coalition opposing Rome began to fracture. Some communities accepted the offers. Others followed. One by one, resistance weakened. By 88 BC, organized opposition had largely collapsed. The war ended, but its consequences transformed Italy forever. The victory did not simply preserve Roman authority. It expanded the Roman citizen body on a scale never seen before. Communities throughout Italy received citizenship. Former distinctions that had separated many Italians from Romans began disappearing. The descendants of the ancient Latins now possessed the same legal status as the inhabitants of Rome itself. The process completed a transformation that had begun centuries earlier. The Latins were no longer allies, no longer subjects, no longer members of a separate political community. They were Romans. The significance of this development is difficult to overstate. Rome had spent centuries building systems capable of integrating diverse peoples. The social war accelerated that process dramatically. Italy became more unified politically than ever before. The old divisions that once defined central Italy lost much of their practical importance. Citizenship created common interests. Shared rights encouraged broader participation. The foundations of a truly Italian-Roman state emerged. Yet even as political distinctions faded, cultural memory endured. Ancient festivals continued. Traditional sanctuaries remained active. Communities preserved local histories. The old sacred center on the Alban Mount still attracted worshippers. The Fyrii Latini survived. Though its political meaning had changed long ago, the ceremony continued linking Romans to their deepest historical roots. Every year, magistrates traveled to participate in rituals older than the Republic itself. The symbolism was powerful. Rome had conquered the Latin world. Yet Rome also remained part of that world. Religion preserved the connection. Memory preserved the connection. Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Romanian, and others. Hundreds of millions of people today speak languages descended from the tongue once spoken by the ancient Latins of central Italy. The influence extends beyond language itself. Latin became the language of law, government, religion, scholarship, education, science. For centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire, scholars across Europe continued writing and communicating in Latin. Its vocabulary shaped modern legal terminology. Its structure influenced educational traditions. Its legacy remains visible throughout the modern world. The institutional achievements of the Latins also left a lasting mark. The Latin League demonstrated early forms of confederation politics. Independent communities cooperated while preserving local autonomy. Those experiences influenced later Roman approaches to alliances, administration, and territorial management. Roman concepts of citizenship, integration, and municipal government drew partly from traditions that originated within the broader Latin world. Even modern political systems contain echoes of these ancient developments. The idea that diverse communities can participate in larger political structures while maintaining local identities remains a challenge faced by societies around the world. The experience of the Latins offers one of history's earliest and most influential examples. Their story reveals both the difficulties and possibilities of political integration. It shows how cooperation can create strength. It also demonstrates how success can generate tensions requiring adaptation and reform. Modern archaeology continues expanding our understanding of this history. Excavations throughout Latium have uncovered settlements, sanctuaries, cemeteries, roads, workshops, and public buildings that provide direct evidence of Latin life. These discoveries reveal societies more sophisticated and dynamic than earlier generations often imagined. They show communities actively shaping their own future rather than merely serving as a prelude to Roman greatness. That point deserves emphasis. The Latins were not important simply because Rome emerged among them. They were important in their own right. They created distinctive cultural traditions. They developed political institutions. They established religious practices. They built networks of cooperation. They shaped the environment in which Rome developed. Without the Latins, there would have been no Rome as history remembers it. The rise of the Republic depended upon foundations laid by generations of Latin communities. The volcanic hills of Latium, the sanctuaries of the Alban Mount, the villages overlooking fertile valleys, the farmers, herders, merchants, craftsmen, priests, and warriors who lived there. Together, they created a culture that would influence the course of world history. Their identity changed over time. Their political institutions disappeared. Their independence ended. Yet their legacy endured. In language, in law, in religion, in government, in culture, and ultimately in the civilization that grew from their homeland. The story that began among scattered Iron Age settlements ended not with destruction, but with transformation. The Latins became part of something larger than themselves. At the same time, that larger entity remained forever shaped by its Latin origins. Their history reminds us that the peoples who leave the greatest mark on the world are not always those who begin as the most powerful. Sometimes they begin as small communities on volcanic hills, speaking a local language, tending their fields, honoring their gods, and slowly building connections with their neighbors. Over generations, those connections can create institutions. Those institutions can shape states. Those states can influence civilizations. And civilizations can leave legacies that endure for thousands of years. The Latins did exactly that. Their political independence vanished. Their cultural influence did not. Their cities changed. Their language spread across continents. Their traditions helped shape one of history's greatest powers. And through Rome, through Latin, and through the countless institutions and ideas that emerge from their world, the memory of the Latins continues to echo across the centuries. Long after the ancient sanctuaries grew silent and the old confederation passed into history to be by the 2nd century BC, the world of the ancient Latins would have been almost unrecognizable to their distant ancestors. The small hilltop settlements that once overlooked volcanic valleys had become parts of a vast and increasingly interconnected political system. The Latin League was gone. The old confederation assemblies no longer governed regional affairs. Independent Latin diplomacy had disappeared. The balance of power that once existed among the communities of Latium had long since faded into memory. And yet, despite all of these changes, the Latins themselves had not vanished. In many ways, they had achieved something far more remarkable. They had become inseparable from Rome. Their language had become Rome's language. Their religious traditions had become part of Roman religion. Their institutions had influenced Roman political development. Their homeland formed the heartland of the Republic. The success of Rome and the success of the Latin peoples had become intertwined. Yet success brought new challenges. As Roman territory expanded across Italy and far beyond, the political system struggled to keep pace. Communities that contributed soldiers, taxes, and resources increasingly demanded a greater share in the benefits of Roman power. The issues that once divided Rome and the Latin League began appearing again in new forms. Questions about equality, questions about citizenship, questions about representation, questions about who truly belonged within the Roman political community. For generations, Rome had expanded through a flexible system of alliances and varying legal statuses. Some communities possessed full citizenship. Others held partial rights. Others remained allies with special obligations. This system had helped Rome conquer Italy. But by the 1st century BC, it was creating growing tensions. Many Italian communities had fought loyally for Rome for generations. Their soldiers had died in Roman wars. Their leaders had supported Roman policies. Their economies had become deeply integrated into Roman commerce. Yet many still lacked the full political rights enjoyed by Roman citizens. The contradiction became increasingly difficult to justify. Among those who recognized the danger was Marcus Livius Drusus. In 91 BC, He attempted to address the growing crisis. His proposals sought to extend citizenship more broadly to Rome's Italian allies. He understood that the existing system could not continue indefinitely. Communities that shared Rome's burdens increasingly expected to share its privileges. Drusus believed reform offered the best path forward, but reform proved controversial. Powerful interests opposed change. Political conflict intensified. Then Drusus was assassinated. His death shocked Italy. More importantly, it convinced many allied communities that peaceful solutions might be impossible. The result was one of the most serious internal conflicts in Roman history. The Social War. The name can be misleading to modern ears. It does not refer to society in the modern sense. Rather, it derives from the Latin word for allies. This was a war between Rome and many of the communities that had long stood beside it. Among them were descendants of peoples who had once belonged to the broader Latin world. The conflict erupted in 91 BC and spread rapidly across Italy. Communities that had served Rome for generations now rebelled. Their demands centered on a single issue: citizenship. They no longer wished to remain allies. They wanted equality. The irony was extraordinary. Centuries earlier, many Latins had fought Rome to preserve independence. Now their descendants fought for inclusion. The struggle revealed how deeply Italy had changed. The goal was no longer separation from Rome. The goal was participation within Rome. The rebels created their own political structures. They established administrative institutions. They minted coins. They organized armies. For a time, they posed a genuine threat to Roman authority. The war was brutal. Ancient sources describe fierce campaigns. Cities changed hands. Entire regions suffered devastation. Roman armies fought experienced opponents who understood Roman tactics and organization. Victory would not come easily. Yet Rome eventually recognized an important reality. Military success alone could not solve the problem. The grievances driving the rebellion were legitimate. Continued resistance would persist unless the underlying issues were addressed. As a result, Roman leaders adopted a strategy combining military pressure with political concessions. Laws were passed offering citizenship to loyal communities. Additional legislation extended opportunities to former rebels willing to lay down their arms. Gradually, the coalition opposing Rome began to fracture. Some communities accepted the offers. Others followed. One by one, resistance weakened. By 88 BC, organized opposition had largely collapsed. The war ended, but its consequences transformed Italy forever. The victory did not simply preserve Roman authority. It expanded the Roman citizen body on a scale never seen before. Communities throughout Italy received citizenship. Former distinctions that had separated many Italians from Romans began disappearing. The descendants of the ancient Latins now possessed the same legal status as the inhabitants of Rome itself. The process completed a transformation that had begun centuries earlier. The Latins were no longer allies, no longer subjects, no longer members of a separate political community. They were Romans. The significance of this development is difficult to overstate. Rome had spent centuries building systems capable of integrating diverse peoples. The social war accelerated that process dramatically. Italy became more unified politically than ever before. The old divisions that once defined central Italy lost much of their practical importance. Citizenship created common interests. Shared rights encouraged broader participation. The foundations of a truly Italian Roman state emerged. Yet even as political distinctions faded, cultural memory endured. Ancient festivals continued. Traditional sanctuaries remained active. Communities preserved local histories. The old sacred center on the Alban Mount still attracted worshippers. The Fyrii Latini survived. Though its political meaning had changed long ago, the ceremony continued linking Romans to their deepest historical roots. Every year, magistrates traveled to participate in rituals older than the Republic itself. The symbolism was powerful. Rome had conquered the Latin world, yet Rome also remained part of that world. Religion preserved the connection. Memory preserved the connection. Culture preserved the connection. The Latin language achieved an even greater legacy. Originally spoken only in a small region of central Italy, it spread alongside Roman expansion. As Roman influence reached Spain, Gaul, North Africa, the Balkans, and beyond, Latin traveled with soldiers, merchants, settlers, and administrators. Over time, local populations adopted it. Regional variations emerged. Centuries later, those variations evolved into entirely new languages. Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Romanian, and others. Hundreds of millions of people today speak languages descended from the tongue once spoken by the ancient Latins of central Italy. The influence extends beyond language itself. Latin became the language of law, government, religion, scholarship, education, science. For centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire, scholars across Europe continued writing and communicating in Latin. Its vocabulary shaped modern legal terminology. Its structure influenced educational traditions. Its legacy remains visible throughout the modern world. The institutional achievements of the Latins also left a lasting mark. The Latin League demonstrated early forms of confederation politics. Independent communities cooperated while preserving local autonomy. Those experiences influenced later Roman approaches to alliances, administration, and territorial management. Roman concepts of citizenship, integration, and municipal government drew partly from traditions that originated within the broader Latin world. Even modern political systems contain echoes of these ancient developments. The idea that diverse communities can participate in larger political structures while maintaining local identities remains a challenge faced by societies around the world. The experience of the Latins offers one of history's earliest and most influential examples. Their story reveals both the difficulties and possibilities of political integration. It shows how cooperation can create strength. It also demonstrates how success can generate tensions requiring adaptation and reform. Modern archaeology continues expanding our understanding of this history. Excavations throughout Latium have uncovered settlements, sanctuaries, cemeteries, roads, workshops, and public buildings that provide direct evidence of Latin life. These discoveries reveal societies more sophisticated and dynamic than earlier generations often imagined. They show communities actively shaping their own future rather than merely serving as a prelude to Roman greatness. That point deserves emphasis. The Latins were not important simply because Rome emerged among them. They were important in their own right. They created distinctive cultural traditions. They developed political institutions. They established religious practices. They built networks of cooperation. They shaped the environment in which Rome developed. Without the Latins, there would have been no Rome as history remembers it. The rise of the Republic depended upon foundations laid by generations of Latin communities. The volcanic hills of Latium, the sanctuaries of the Alban Mount, the villages overlooking fertile valleys, the farmers, herders, merchants, craftsmen, priests, and warriors who lived there. Together, they created a culture that would influence the course of world history. Their identity changed over time. Their political institutions disappeared. Their independence ended. Yet their legacy endured. In language, in law, in religion, in government, in culture, and ultimately in the civilization that grew from their homeland. The story that began among scattered Iron Age settlements ended not with destruction, but with transformation. The Latins became part of something larger than themselves. At the same time, that larger entity remained forever shaped by its Latin origins. Their history reminds us that the peoples who leave the greatest mark on the world are not always those who begin as the most powerful. Sometimes they begin as small communities on volcanic hills, speaking a local language, tending their fields, honoring their gods, and slowly building connections with their neighbors. Over generations, those connections can create institutions. Those institutions can shape states. Those states can influence civilizations. And civilizations can leave legacies that endure for thousands of years. The Latins did exactly that. Their political independence vanished. Their cultural influence did not. Their cities changed. Their language spread across continents. Their traditions helped shape one of history's greatest powers. And through Rome, through Latin, and through the countless institutions and ideas that emerge from their world, the memory of the Latins continues to echo across the centuries. Long after the ancient sanctuaries grew silent and the old confederation passed into history.